Good morning. This is going to be a little different. I'm at the stage of my academic career that I call my anecdotage. This is somewhere between full professor and total senility. And it's characterized by an imperturbable sense of wanting to tell stories and of relating anecdotes that tie together some of my experiences at Carleton. They're going to be almost exclusively focused, however, on my students. They have educated me over the years in ways that were very surprising. And so if I am a wiser man now than when I arrived at Carleton in 1977, it's in large part because of the challenging and creative students that I've had the opportunity to interact with and who have shaped me, for better or for worse, the way I am. I arrived in 1977, and my daughter, who was then 7, was celebrating her 7th birthday. And I had been teaching at Carleton in the daytime. And I was on the way home, and it was sort of, I was tired. I put a lot of energy into my lectures. And so when I lecture and I'm tired, my hair gets sort of sloppy. It's sort of fine hair, and so it sort of goes down flat. So I thought, before I go home to the party, I will fluff my hair. So I fluffed my hair. I looked out my rearview mirror. Here are 4 Carleton students, all women, all going. They keep you on our feet, and they can be a perverse lot. I got home, appropriately fluffed, and my daughter, in a conspiratorial sort of way, came up and said, "Dad," you know the way kids will say, "Dad," and you know it's money or something like that they want. "For the party, could you hypnotize the people and turn them into barnyard animals?" Now, she knew that I knew a bit about hypnosis, and I had just been expatiating, although I'm sure she wasn't listening, that Nick Spanos, many of your mentor have been mentees, was world famous for his studies in this area. And in fact, Carleton in 1979 was the 3rd ranked university in the world in publications in the field of clinical, sorry Rusty, and abnormal psychology. So it was UCLA, Yale, Carleton. And it was all because of one person, Nick Spanos. So it should have been Spanos University. He was fairly productive. So I'd been talking hypnosis, and she asked, "What's hypnosis?" And so I said, "No, of course I can't. I shall not hypnotize." And then, you know, the entities from little kids that age, they're so charming. But she said, "What could you do?" And she demurred. And then she came back a little bit. Now the guests were starting to rush. "Could you do something interesting psychologically?" This is challenging. You know, you've got the hardest audience in the world. So I said, "Okay, get them into the kitchen. And I want a volunteer." Now, every child in Ontario in 1977 was called Jennifer, except for my daughter, who was Hillary. So I said, "Could I have a volunteer?" And lo and behold, a Jennifer. Says, "Me?" So I said, "Yes, Jennifer. Okay, I want you to get some spit in your mouth." And I exaggerated like this. She looked at me. "Okay, if you got it, now swallow it." Was that funny at all? Was that strange? Apparently she had swallowed before in her life, and this was deeply uninteresting. And my daughter was getting that sort of panicky look of, "Oh my God." So I said, "Okay, now get another bowl of spit." And I took out a nice clean glass and said, "Now spit it in there." So a perfect expectoration of spit plopped in the bottom of the glass. And I said, "Now, drink it." And she said, ew, gross. And everybody said, ew, gross. And that was great. But there was always somebody really smart and intrusive at these parties, another Jennifer, as it turns out, who said, well, I said, well, why is it? Why? It's okay here, but once you spit it out and you bring it back in, is it just at the tipping point that it becomes transmogrified into something really unpleasant? So the other Jennifer put up her hand and said, it's cold when you put it in the glass, but it's warm here. I thought, what a great experimental psychologist you would make. So I said, should we test it out? Why don't we go and heat up the water and then drink it? And they said, oh, double O. So that was my little spit experiment. And my daughter is still speaking to me 40 years later, so, or 33 years later. But it ties into something that happened. What is it about the things that we regard as us, deeply personal, so subtle that it transforms in an instant from warm in me to something alien and cold? I've been lecturing on my then new theory of personality, which had to do with people's personal projects. What gives rise to the occasions of your life? How do they shape and provide meaning for your life? And I studied it for many years, and it was all started and caught on while I was in my Carleton years. And for that, I'll be forever grateful. The support of faculty, incidentally, for this sort of strange idea was phenomenal. I've been to a lot of universities that have strong political undercurrents. This department was a source of collegial support that I think is without a match that I know in my own experience. And so I was wound up to lecture on personal projects. I had been lecturing on a theory by George Kelly called personal construct theory, these little goggles through which you make sense of your life. And when Kelly used to finish his lectures, he would say, you know, in many respects, you are your constructs. I thought, ooh, that's really neat. So trying to come up with an alternative unit of analysis, I ended this lecture by saying, you know, it could be said that you are your personal projects. And a woman sitting there, where Joanne is right now, had her arms crossed and she said, I am not my personal projects. Or not, as the case may be. And I thought, I knew the student. She was a brilliant student, older than the rest. And at the break, I said, what's up? You know, have I sort of done something that offended you or caught you in a way that you felt impelled to say something? Because she was normally quite quiet. And she said, and she started to tear up, and she said, this is my only personal project, this course. All the other projects in my life are assigned to me by other people. And this, for me, is my core personal project. So when people say, oh, she's this or that or something else with which she did not identify, she didn't want to be loaded up with that. This was her core project. That night began the beginning of a whole new dimension for personal projects analysis, self-identity. To what extent is an Elizabeth or a George truly Elizabethan in her project pursuits, purely Georgian in the tasks he undertakes? And that was directly stimulated by a student who had the courage in class to speak up and taught me something. Now, sometimes they can catch you in ways that are totally unexpected. And I remember in my advanced assessment course, human assessment honor seminar, I would give students a chance to take various assessment devices and keep a journal of how the assessment devices they took would elaborate upon, clarify, in some sense explain a personal sketch that they wrote at the beginning of the course, a bit of a life history and their personality characteristics and so on. And it was a lot of marking, and I would assiduously go through and read every one of their entries. They were open-ended. They could make short comments. They could be psychometric, they could be existential, as long as they were grappling with issues that mattered to them. I got to the end of one and flipped through. It was very psychometrically oriented, so there were a lot of things on reliability and validity. And then the final one said, Professor Little, I have enjoyed the course, but I've been having a strange feeling recently. And I'm going to take, Will, you will remember this. I am going to take the handgun that my brother-in-law gave me for Christmas, and I'm going to shoot you between your beady little eyes. Do not walk by the Rideau Canal. My gun is loaded. I have to be really honest. You know what my first response was? What do you mean, beady little eyes? and that's the only thing I could cope with. The rest was too big for a simple man like me. So it ended up that Will, you do remember that now, I'm sure, that Will was a masterful tactician when it came to handling issues like this. And he convinced me that it might be, just in case it were true, that I should advise the students in my lab. And so I went down to the lab and told them. I didn't tell the name of the student because I thought that would be inappropriate. He was my student. And the journal was anonymous. And so I didn't want it. Turns out he would have been arrested over the weekend and put in prison. And I didn't want that. But I did tell my students in the lab. And here's what lab students can be like. Bless their hearts. They say, oh, that's terrible. Brian, remember the letters of recommendation you were going to write? Do I need to finish the sentence? Right? Do you think you could sort of hurry up with that? So always supportive and always their nose to the grindstone. Loved them. Now I went back to sputum in another event that happened, which was I had been lecturing a night class. Again, I was tired. And when I'm tired, I like to basically just lay down on the couch and sort of snooze off. I went downstairs, noticed a little pot full of peanuts. I thought, oh, how nice. That's exactly what I wanted to be able to eat the peanuts. I thought, these are really bland. So I went upstairs. My daughter, who by then was, I guess, maybe 14, and on one of the typical youth projects of cutting down some of her food intake or whatever it might have been. And I said, boy, those are the blandest peanuts. She said, oh, Dad, you didn't eat those. Yes. She said, oh, I had eaten them all and then just sort of sucked them and then put them back. So these were pre-sucked peanuts. I thought, this is pretty gross. And it sort of seemed to me to be a kind of revisiting of the early spit things 7 years later. So I started to concoct a theory of maybe this is a kind of subtle form of peanuts envy or something like this. I told my class this, as you would expect. This is a kind of anecdote that might be used to exemplify something. And I guess what I really want to say here is that there are levels of idiocy that I can reach. And I mean it, the term idiot, not in any defamatory or any ignoble sense, but in the literal sense of behavior associated with people whose IQ measures 8. I had told my class this little anecdote, and final exams were being written. I loved sort of watching them, and just before the exam, one of the women in the class came up and said, gave me a little package of peanuts. Said, for Professor Little and his daughter, enjoy. And I thought, well, I still have that can of peanuts. I thought, isn't that sweet? So nice, so thoughtful, that's so cute. So I opened up. I started, these are the student pre-sucked peanuts. Oh, gross. Sometimes it wasn't my own behavior in class, but other professors who I had sort of interact with casually in the Loeb cafeteria, now called Chez Loeb or whatever it might be. And it was one day I was in line in the Loeb, and there was a fellow from another department, I won't say which department, who was with a young woman I had seen him with before, and which, to put it charitably, he was affectively tinged about. And she was talking about how difficult her courses were. And it began with, I really, really want to be a gynecologist. But I hate math. I'm failing physics. I don't get chemistry. And he turned around and he said, go for it. Apply to med school. And what I wanted to say was, no! For the sake of the wombs of the women in Canada, do not! But I didn't. Being a rather shy and retiring person, I didn't say that. But these are some of the things I wish I had said during my years at Carleton. I gather that she failed all those courses. She even failed the English course, because I would have been tempted to advise that she writes fiction about medical issues. But it was one of those examples of where sometimes being told there's nothing you can't do may want to be reconfigured as, let's bring out the best in you that will fit with the things, the opportunities that are there, and so on. Let's do it in a constructive way rather than the kind of ex cathedral. You are fabulous. So at graduation, another student in the class who I had told variations on that anecdote about came up with her parents. And it's really, really nice to meet parents at graduation. It's lovely. And she said, oh, I want you to meet Professor Little. I really enjoyed his class. And he gave me the most important lesson of my life, which was, there's nothing you can't do. And here I have this dilemma. Do I say, that's not what I said, you great thundering twit? Or do I say, as I did, well, isn't that nice? So again, I think that in my anecdotage, I might start to revisit these people because they ping you every now and then on email and say, hey, I'm still doing magnificently. and sometimes they will actually, they will succeed. I had one student down south who finished his honors thesis, got his PhD in 3 years, in 2.5 years, and is now, 6 years later, still in his 20s, a full professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And he also said on this track he laid out for himself that he would get married. He would fall in love in the first term at the University of Michigan, and he did, and he got married, and he now has 2 children. I can't say I'm wanting something unfortunate to happen, but it certainly makes me wonder whether this whole notion of there's nothing you can't do, there may actually be some truth in it for some people who are fortunate. When I used to go into class, how am I doing for time? Wrap up in 1 minute? Okay. Thank you. Really? Have I time to sing? Nah, okay. Okay. When I used to go into my classes, I would say at the beginning, like all of us do as faculty members, students who are there early say, how you doing? And they would say, what? Fine. And so I learned at Carleton to say, no, really. How are you doing? And then everything changed. Then they talk about their boyfriend who's gone to Toronto, or why heteroskedasticity in your predictor variable is relevant to her life. And it led me, from that point on, this was in the early 80s, to always say that to people who I care about. No, really. How are you doing? And in finishing my courses in recent years, I've had the opportunity to read out, and this is just 2 lines, I'm going to take it from 28 lines to 2. A philosopher called Owen Flanagan has written about the last dance. And some of the comments we've heard today about people who've passed on, who were our dear colleagues, reminds us that it might be a good idea to take stock of our lives and answer the question, no, really, sooner rather than later. And this is my students refer to it as a poem. It's not. It's the final chapter of a philosophy book, a very dense philosophy book. But he ends up talking about dances with ourselves. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I will say that when we reflect with ourselves about how this life has gone, it will be good to feel peace of mind, to be comfortable, to sense integrity, and to recognize that we have had some fun. I second that. Thank you.